guys, so one of the questions we get asked a lot is, what is preload? How do we set preload? How do we know it's set correctly? And how do we adjust height? So we're going to go over this on the Shockworks, okay? So one of the things you'll notice on the Shockworks, you're going to get one of these cards, okay? So whether you bought the Comfort, the Premium, or the Drag, you're going to get these cards, and it'll tell you what spring rates you have on there, what the preload requirement is, and if it's been preset. The only ones that will come preset are going to be the Premiums and the Drags, and that will only be the rears, not the fronts. But let's go over it. So you have these specs here, and we'll go over these specs. So let's say this setup is a Premium. So the Premiums on the fronts require a 0 preload, right? Which is just a captive preload, which basically what that means is we're going to take this spring, right? And you'll see that between the two perches, there's play, right? The spring moves, but we don't want that to move, right? So what we want to do is we want to take this locking collar, right, and we're going to move this up. When it touches the spring, all right, we're going to crank it a couple more times. All right, now there's no space. You see how this is no longer moving? There's no space on top or bottom. This is now captive. That's a captive preload. And we're going to take the locking collar, we're going to rotate it up. All right, now to lock it, in case you don't know, you take your spanner wrenches, all right? You're gonna twist the locking collar one way while twisting the other collar the other way. They will lock into each other, and that's how you lock the height. Oh, I'm sorry, lock the spring. Now, down here we have the height adjustment, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna lower this. If we were to lower this car, we would do this up. It should go without saying, but obviously you would do this on the car, all right? I'm going to raise that up, and then what we would do is, now that these two are locked in, you would take your spanner wrenches and you would twist counterclockwise, which would in turn spin this entire threaded rod into this lower bracket, thus lowering the car. If you wanted to raise the car, you would do it the other way, and that's how you would raise the car. So that's how you adjust the height. Then when you get to the height that you want, you would lower this back down to where it's meeting the coupler, and you would lock it in using your spanner wrenches. That'll then lock the height, so you're locked and locked. Now, let's go and talk about if this was to have preload, right? So right now, like I said, we're talking about the Premium. So this is just a captive preload, 0 preload. But let's say we wanted to add preload, or let's say you're working with a different set of coilovers or whatever, and you want to know more about preload or add some preload. This is how you would do it, okay? So right now, we know this is at 0, right? This is at a 0 preload, right? There's almost no tension on here, right? So what we want to do is, let's say we wanted to add 10 millimeter, right, of preload. Making sure that the bottom does not move, right? Because this is what we're going to actually measure. How we know we got to 10 mil is the gap that we're making in between these two collars, okay? So we want to keep the lower one locked, and you can do that by holding your spanner wrench on it, or holding on it with your hand if need be. However you want, you have to make sure that this one stays locked. And we're going to twist the top one, okay? Now this can be done off of the car, okay? We do it off the car. As far as setting the height, I mean, I would recommend doing it on the car just so that you know where the heights are. But so now we're spinning this, okay? Now little by little, you see the space that we're making between the lower locking ring that we haven't moved and the top ring, right? So as we make more space, that we are now setting preload, right? So it's getting a little hard because you can only go so far with your hand. And I don't want to mar up somebody's set of coilovers, so we'll just take it from there, okay? So now we have some preload set into this. What we do is we take our calipers, make sure that you guys have, an actual set of calipers. You're not guessing, all right? We want to measure the space between there. All right, so now I've added about 6.75 millimeter of preload. All right, so depending on what your setup is, if it calls for 10, if you're using one of the Shockworks setups that calls for some front preload, if you're using a different brand, whatever the case is, whatever your setup is, find out what the preload is, and that's how you will set the preload. This space is now the preload. So what we would take is the lower ring, bring it up to the top ring, and like I said before, we're going to pull one way, push one the other with your spanner wrenches, not your hands. And you would lock these two together. Now your preload is set on this. So if this setup called for a 6.75 millimeter preload, it would be perfect right now. And now the preload's set, and now you have all this space for height adjustment.